So back in June, one of our club members, Paris, put a post up on the Fisher Friends Facebook page. She was asking for some advice as to what she could do with her goldfish tank to make it a bit more attractive. Shane saw the post and he knew it was a big tank, so he thought it might be a good one to use as an aquascaping demonstration for the next club meeting. So I asked Paris if she had any ideas of how she'd like the tank to look, and she sent me through this picture, which I was quite happy with for a couple of reasons. One, the plants in the picture were quite suitable for the sort of tank she was trying to achieve, and secondly, she'd set the bar reasonably low with her expectations, so that meant that what she had in mind was definitely achievable, and may even be able to pull off something a little better. Morning everyone, so just getting ready to head off around to Paris and Tate's place now to do a bit of aquascaping on their big tank that they've got. Got the last of my little bits and pieces here to go in the car, a few some hose and a few little bits of hardscape. So we're heading off around there shortly to do a bit of work, so see you there. So I explained to Paris that we needed to have this tank completely empty to be able to do this job properly. In the past, all of her landscaping or aquascaping had been done with the fish and everything in the tank, which is how most people do it at home, but to do a proper job from scratch, it's much easier to do it if you're draining everything out and have the tank empty. So when I got to Paris's place, the fish had already been caught out and they were being housed in a couple of big chili bins. So we just had a few other little tasks to complete, like draining the tank completely, and we took the filter off and we hooked that up onto one of the chili bins so that the fish had a filter going for the few hours that they were stored in there, and also help prevent any bacterial die-off or anything like that in the filter. So this tank just had a clear glass back on it, and Paris has asked if we could put some colour on the back or something to change it a little bit. So we're just painting the back of the tank black. I find for aquascape tanks either black or some shade of white works best. And black brings up the colours of the fish quite well, and I find that painting it works better than just sticking something onto the back of the tank, because like a piece of paper or something like that, because you get an air gap between the paper and the glass, and that makes it quite dull. So painting brings up the intensity quite well. The other things you can use if you're going to use, if you want to go the white look, you can use the frosting, the stick-on frosting that you can get for like bathroom windows and that sort of thing. You can get that from the likes of Mitre 10, and that works quite well for a sort of a semi-see-through kind of a finish. So this is the tank that we're going to be trying to aquascape today. It's 2 meters long by about half a meter high and half a meter deep. So it's quite a decent sized tank to work with, holds a little over 500 litres. Tate and Paris have collected this big piece of driftwood here themselves and would like to use it in the tank, so we're going to have a try and see if it fits. It's quite a big piece. I've had it soaking in the bath for the last, I don't know, a couple of weeks, is it? And it's quite waterlogged now, but it's still floating a little bit, and that's quite normal when you collect your own driftwood, for it to float for quite a while. So if they're small pieces, you can put them in a pot and boil them, and that helps them to waterlog and sink. It also helps to leach out some of the tannins and stuff in there, which will make your water go brown. I've noticed while this has been floating in the bath that it's got a lot of like sort of fluffy stuff growing on the surface, and that's sort of just a biofilm of all the bacteria and fungus and stuff that was normally growing on the surface of the wood, and that's started to break down, well, started to die, I should say, once they put it underwater and there's no oxygen getting in for those organisms. So that's reasonably normal, and that'll happen with wood that you buy in the store, like your spider wood and that sort of thing. And it doesn't cause any harm, but it does look a bit ugly. Also, same thing, this wood's starting to get a little bit smelly, same thing, it's just the bacteria and stuff dying, and that will pass after a while. So other than that, the sort of piece that we would mainly like to incorporate, I've collected a few other bits to bring along here. Now it's a good idea when you're doing an aquascape of a tank to have a lot of stuff to choose from. So obviously there's way more here than what we're going to put in the tank. That gives you the flexibility to try something, see if it's going to work. If it doesn't work, take it out and try something else. So we're just trying to decide the best way for this piece of wood to go into the tank. Obviously it could go in like this, standing on its end, so it's like it's a tree sitting in the tank with the roots sort of growing down. Maybe you could even have the top sticking out of the top of the tank. Alternatively, we could have it down on its side like it's a fallen tree perhaps. And conveniently this piece of wood's got a nice flat back along the back there, so it can go up quite close to the glass without causing any major issues. So I think we'll try it on its side like this to start with, and see how that looks with incorporating some other bits and pieces in, and if I'm not happy with that, we'll try it the other way around. You want to try and have, obviously this wood will all look different colours at the moment. A lot of it's going to get darker when it gets wet. There is a limit to how much they will change, but you want to try and have all your wood and your rocks looking like they all came from the same place or the same tree. If you have it all mixed up, it just doesn't look natural. So I want to try and stick to the same style, if that makes sense. Also, when you're selecting a rock to go in the tank, this is actually quite a good example. Every piece of hardscape, every rock, actually this one's even better, has a good face and a bad face. And so this rock here, you wouldn't put it in the tank this way around because it's quite boring. There's quite a flat, boring face, whereas the other side of it has got a lot more character, and that's the way that you want to have it facing. Now sometimes that will limit the way you can use a rock in the tank because of maybe the shape of the rock, that you want it to go a certain way, point in a certain direction, but the face that is usable, so this face and this one, might not work how you want it to. So I guess this is a good example. This end of this rock here is looking quite nice, and that would point quite nicely off into that sort of direction. So you were just sort of looking at that side of it. Now if you wanted a rock that was pointing off in the other direction, this one might not be the best rock to choose, so you'd have to look for something else. Also, if you have bigger rocks and you want smaller rocks, it's an easy problem to solve with a hammer and some safety glasses, and off you go. And you soon have yourself a few smaller rocks that you can choose some different pieces from to get the right size and shape that you're after. So the idea with the piece that I've just placed at the moment, the piece of wood, as I've hidden the back edge of it, I kind of want it to look like it's not a separate piece of wood, but it's a branch or something coming off the log that's fallen over. It looks quite different at the moment because you've got different colours, but you'll find that will even up once it all gets wet. So one of the handy things about working with wood is that you don't have to stick to the size that you got when you found it at the beach or bought it. You can change it easily enough just using a saw. So this piece we decided is a little bit too long, so we're just taking a little piece off the end here, and hopefully that allows us to use it how we want to. In the initial stages, this can be quite a time-consuming process. You have to try something, see if you like it, have a good look, have a think about it. If it doesn't work how you want it, try something new. So we did this process quite a bit with this tank, and kept changing things around. It took us a while to finally decide on something, on a base plan that we all liked. So there were a few things that made this tank quite hard to aquascape. Mostly the length of the tank. So being 2 meters long, there was a lot of space that needed something to fill it, and the ratio of length to height, it just made that really tricky to have enough stuff in there without it looking cluttered. Normally on most tanks you'd try and have about a focal point, so that the main point of interest, about a third of the way along the tank. We ended up breaking that rule a little bit with this tank because of the angle that you view it from. When you come into the room, you're looking at it, you're not looking at the tank straight on, you're looking at it from one corner. So we felt that it was reasonably safe to push all of the hardscape right into the opposite corner and still have a reasonably good effect. The other thing that made it a little bit tricky was the fact that they use the Paris is using white sand as a substrate in this tank. Now that works really well for her with her goldfish, but it does make scaping a little bit trickier because you can't effectively build up the height of the substrate. So normally you would have in parts of the tank the substrate coming up to or probably at least half the height of the tank at the back, so it would be sort of halfway up the tank, and that gives an extra sense of depth and helps you push all your hardscape into something to hold it and sort of give it shape and make it look natural. In this case, we didn't have that option, so all of the hardscape is just sort of perched on top of the sand. So it looks a little bit funny, but we got a decent effect in the end. So the plants that I've picked for this tank are mostly rhizome plants, so plants that grow from creeping stem, like this Java fern here. So you've got the creeping stem here, which is the rhizome, which grows along, and the leaves grow off of that. Now the advantage of these plants for this tank is that they generally don't need to grow into gravel or any sort of substrate, they'll just grow just attached to rocks and wood. Now the reason that's an advantage here, well, A, because we've got sand in this tank, but more importantly, because the goldfish that live in this tank like to pull out most of the plants and make a bit of a mess. So that's why we've gone with these plants. The other advantage of rhizome plants in general is that they're slow growing, and because they're slow growing, that means that they have less demand for light and nutrients, so you don't need to have expensive lights or be adding fertilizers or CO2 and that sort of thing to the tank. Now the disadvantage of that, of course, of them being slow growing, is that they're quite can be a little bit harder to find in the stores and what have you, and they can be quite expensive. So Paris managed to get this piece here off of Trade Me the other day, and that piece of Anubius, which is one of the slowest growing plants you can get, was $10 in the end. So for the amount that we'd need for a tank this size to make it look good, I know you'd probably be looking at about $400 worth of plants, which obviously we're not prepared to spend. So I'm just making do with what I can put together from out of my tanks at home. This whole tank holds more water than my tanks put together, so it's hard to get enough plant out of mine, but hopefully we'll have enough to get started and make it look good. So I'm just planting these plants individually. They're quite hard to plant down and behind here, but I'm making the best that I can do. Some of them you won't see because they're quite small, but I'm hoping that they'll grow up and you'll be able to see them eventually. The good thing about planting behind something like a piece of wood or some rocks is that you don't have to worry about seeing the exposed stems, the bases of the plants, which can often be quite ugly. One of the plants that I have chosen, which isn't a rhizome plant, is this one, which is cardamom, and this one doesn't really grow a particularly strong root system. So in this particular case, we leave the lead weight on, which you would normally take off, and it just sort of acts like a floating plant, but the lead weight holds it down in the tank. It's because it doesn't have to be rooted in the water, in the substrate. It's quite good for this sort of tank, once again, where the fish might end up pulling it out otherwise. So if when you're planting your tank and it's dry like we've got here, you can use just a squirt bottle, something like this, to just apply a little bit of water so they don't dry out too much while you're planting. So we've got two different types of plants here that are the same genus. So we've got two different types of Anubius. This is, well, technically they're actually the same species, but this is Anubius, a larger type of Anubis, and this is a smaller one, Anubis Nana here. So it's just a smaller variant of this other plant. And often when you've got two different leaf sizes on a similar looking plant like this, if you plant the bigger leaf size towards the front and the smaller leaf size towards the back, it gives you a slight feeling that the tank is deeper than what it actually is, because you're seeing these ones larger and these ones look like they're further away because they're so much smaller. So it's a trick that you can use to make things look, to make the tank look deeper. So I like when I can, mostly because I'm lazy, to just put these put plants into any sort of nooks and crannies that I can find in the wood that would naturally hold it there. That saves having to muck around tying it on or gluing it in place. This one, Bulbitis or Congo fern, is quite rare in New Zealand, and it's one of the rarer rhizome plants, but it has got quite a nice sort of lacy sort of leaf. Normally when we are using plants like the rhizome plants that I was talking about, that need to grow attached to rocks or wood and that sort of thing, they have to be tied on initially until they grow roots and hold themselves in place. So I use black cotton normally, and tie them on, and it's quite time consuming and tedious. The best way, or the easiest way to do that, is to take each piece of wood out of the tank and tie it on. Now obviously in this particular case it's taken a lot of work to get the wood in there, and we're not going to take it out and tie them on. If we have to, we'll try and tie them on in place. Today I've got some good old super glue. So any cyanoacrylate glue will work. This one's a gel type glue, so you can just put that on, dab the plant onto it, and it should just hold it in place. Now I haven't used this before, so this is going to be a new trial for me to see how this works out. You can buy some specific ones. Seachem makes one for applying plants. To be honest, it's just the same as the stuff that you buy from the hardware store. It's just relabeled for by Seachem. So we'll give this a try and see how it works out today. It can, I've experienced before using this stuff on just general plastics and what have you, and I have heard that it happens in tanks as well. It can leave quite a white film around the area that you've glued it on. It looks a little bit ugly, but as the plants grow in, you can't see that anymore anyway. So we'll give it a try, see how it works today. these plants, because of the way I'm planting them in here, they're all going to look quite weird for a while because they're sort of growing straight out. But given enough time, they'll start growing up towards the light and they'll look a lot more natural. You know, they won't have that I've just been put here on a weird angle sort of look that they have at the moment. I might use a bit of this Christmas moss up around maybe around where the water line will be. And if I know Christmas moss, it'll start growing up and out of the water up to a certain point above the water line by wicking water up its sort of body up the rest of the moss. So it can look quite nice sometimes. Often it needs a bit of trimming to keep it tight. That's about what we can fit there. So I've got some plants here. This is a type of crypt, Cryptocorini Belense, which grows tall. This is quite a small one. I've got it in a pot because it needs crypts grow big root systems, so it needs something to grow in. So I'm going to try and see if I can find a spot for this in the tank, somewhere where you can't see the pot, but you'll be able to see the plant growing up and out. So this is the same plant here, just in a smaller pot, so I'll put him down at the other end as well. Now they're just not going to look like much for a long time, but hopefully they will eventually grow up. During these final stages of the planting process, the tank probably looked the best it did the entire day. During the filling stage coming up, we had a few disasters with the wood that we'd put in there starting to float, which disrupted the whole setup. Unfortunately, a lot of the pieces of plant that I'd just pushed into cracks and what have you ended up coming out, and a lot of the wood couldn't be put back into place exactly where we had it to start with. This is a common problem when setting up tanks, and there's lots of ways you can avoid it from happening, or fix it if it does. The system we decided to go with was just placing a few heavy rocks on top of the wood, which is a temporary measure until the wood finally becomes waterlogged and will hold itself down. The major drawback of using this system is that if the rocks they end up toppling for some reason, it can end up cracking your glass on your tank. Of interest was the fact that the plants that I'd glued in place were actually one of the few that managed to stay where I'd put them. So in this particular situation, the glue turned out to be quite a good idea. As with most aquascapes, when we'd finished, the tank was a bit cloudy and had a lot of bubbles on the glass and bits of plant and stuff floating in the water. This will obviously take a day or two to clear and for the tank to look its best. As you can see here in this image, things have had to change quite a bit in the tank. You can see the extra rocks we've had to pile in to hold the wood in place, and a lot of the angles of the wood have changed. It doesn't look as good as it did originally, but still looking quite nice. The next day the tank was looking better. Everything had settled down. The water was much clearer. Now it's just going to take some time for the plants to grow in, and I think it'll start looking really good.